County, and there he served for 30 years as a district or circuit judge. He is retired and currently resides in Owensboro. He is a board member of the Owensboro Area World Affairs Council. He's the chairperson of the Kentucky Judicial Campaign Conduct Committee. He's currently a member of Trinity Episcopal Church, and next month he will be making his 6th trip to the Middle East. His interests are foreign policy and religious history, and he believes that the combination of American foreign policy and the religious climate of the territory work together to make the Middle East a critical place regarding the future of the world and world peace. And with that, I'll give you Charles Bowler.
Thank you, Dixie. Is this on?
It's on.
Okay. It's a delight to be here today, and to have the opportunity.
That's good.
To talk about one of my favorite subjects. I suppose when you retire and as you're aging, that you have opportunities to do certain things that maybe you did not have during the course of your working life. And some people go off in different directions. Some people like to suddenly jump out of airplanes or go to certain sites here or there, do some traveling, go to ball games. And I like to go to ball games. I've never wanted to have an urge to jump out of an airplane. But today I would like to tell you about some of my travels and the people I have had the great pleasure to meet. My talk is entitled, let's see, Traveling for Peace, My Trips to the Middle East. And I do not wish to, that could be a bit presumptuous. I do not wish to convey a false image. In my travels, I do not meet with heads of state. I am not imitating John Kerry or some high-level diplomat. For the most part, I meet ordinary people, and in the process of meeting others, I have learned so much. Most of all, a respect for humanity. And if I can relate just some of what I have observed, then I can be, in some small way, a peacemaker.
Wow.
I want to take you back first to an evening in January 2009 in the old city of Jerusalem. I was on my first trip to Israel and Palestine, and was with a group of seminarians and professors from the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. Our group also included a number of Lutheran pastors and a few others, most with some connection to LSTC. At this point, we had been in the, quote, Holy Land for about a week, and we were staying in the Lutheran guest house located close to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In the old city of Jerusalem, the world's 3 great monotheistic religions interface most intimately. And perhaps the old city is the holiest place on earth. We have there Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. For the Muslims, the Western Wall. For the Jews, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for Christians. At any rate, on this particular evening, 2 presenters from an organization called the Parent Circle Families Forum spoke to us. Rami Elhanan, a Jew, and Mazen Faraj, a Muslim. They quickly gained our attention. First, Rami. Rami is about my age. His background is similar to that of many in Israel. His family members had survived Auschwitz, and others had died in the Holocaust. He had fought in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. His father-in-law had been a prominent Israeli general in the '67 war.
That's for you.
Oh, okay, I left, Randy brought something, I may have left it over there.
I'll just go get it.
Oh, no, I might have 2 glasses of water. Rami, at that time was, well, when Rami was 47 years old, and that was obviously back in the mid-90s, and at that time he had experienced very little contact with Palestinians who lived in Israel or the Palestinian territories of East Jerusalem, the West Bank of Gaza. In September of that year, a tragedy occurred that would impact his life forever. His beautiful teenage daughter, Smadar, was at a mall in downtown Jerusalem when Palestinian suicide bombers detonated devices that killed Smadar and 4 others. Rami, his wife, Nura, and family mourned and grieved the loss of Smadar. In time, months later, Rami went to a meeting and eventually became involved with the Parents Circle Families Forum, a group in which persons who had lost family members in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict met with persons from the other side who had also lost family members. In time, Rami came to understand that the Israelis and Palestinians had to get to know one another. They had to break down the barriers of hatred separating them. Now, Rami goes accompanied by a Palestinian into whatever form is available to tell his story of pain, but most importantly, to tell his story that the answer to violence is not retaliation, but rather that the various sides of this multifaceted conflict must talk. They must get to know one another. They must reject hate for reconciliation. We also heard that evening from Mazen Faraj, a younger Palestinian from Bethlehem, who told a similar story. Mazen grew up in Dahesha, a refugee camp in Bethlehem. Mazen spent time as a young man in an Israeli jail during the first Intifada, the uprising in the late 1980s. In the second Intifada, in April 2002, his father was returning to Bethlehem from Jerusalem, walking, and Mazen's father was unarmed, but he was shot multiple times and killed by Israeli soldiers. Like Rami, Mazen mourned the death of his father for a period of time, but eventually he also attended a meeting of the Parents Circle Families Forum. Over a period of time, Mazen learned to set aside his hatred for the other, the Israelis, and to become a vocal proponent of getting to know the other. Indeed, he and Rami Elhanan became close friends. They found common ground in a shared humanity and a shared loss. They have spoken throughout Israel. And in a classroom setting where they often speak, if they are persuasive to one child that refusing to label others as enemies is our only viable course, they feel successful. They have traveled to other countries with this message, including the United States. And that night in the old city, as they finished their remarks and asked for questions, a Lutheran pastor from Louisiana jumped to his feet and excitedly said, "You have presented the message of Jesus as well as I have ever heard it." Our group learned many lessons that evening within a few hundred feet of where Christian tradition holds that Jesus was executed, buried, and rose from the dead 3 days later. But on that evening, we learned that Christians do not have a monopoly on the teachings of Jesus. Our Christian faith was enriched by the stories of a Jew and a Muslim, of how they had learned to love enemies. On that particular visit in 2009, one of the first persons we met, that our group met, was Archbishop Elias Shakur, a Palestinian Christian of the Greek Melkite Church. And I brought with me a list of some books and materials, and some of you may want to get a copy of that. And one author on that list was Archbishop Shakur. He is an absolutely wonderful person. He became great friends with the first President Bush's Secretary of State, Jim Baker. Jim Baker wrote it forward to that book. The title of it is Blood Brothers, I think. But he provided, and he's the kind of person that, you know, he can start talking and you just want to listen to him all day, Father Shakur. And he built a school for primarily for Christian children, Muslim children, and a few Jews in northern Israel. But he gave us some of the best advice, not only for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but conflict generally, or life generally. He said, and he had talked to us for quite a while, and he just said, get up and do something. You know, at some point in life, you just have to get up and do something. And I will always remember the great charisma of Elias Shakur. 2 years ago, I traveled my third trip to Israel, Palestine. I spent about several weeks in Bethlehem, which is in the Palestinian territory, the West Bank. There, I met Sammy Awad. Sammy was born in the United States to Palestinian parents, but grew up in Palestine, but he went to college and graduate school in the United States. And he comes from a prominent family of Palestinian peacemakers. His father was, at the time, was president of Bethlehem Bible College when I was there. One uncle was a teacher at the college and pastor of the East Jerusalem Baptist Church, whose wife, by the way, is a native of Letcher County, Kentucky. You know, one thing about when you travel over various places, and Roger, you probably, in the military traveling around, it's a very small world. And you have there are many examples of that. But his wife was a Methodist missionary from Letcher County, and then met Alex Awad, and I think one of his books is on that list as well that I've passed out. But then, and Sammy had another uncle who was described as the Palestinian Gandhi. And from Sammy, who is the executive director of the Holy Land Trust, which is headquartered there in Bethlehem, which is where I was doing some volunteer work, I learned that the peace process is a two-track process. One is at the diplomatic level between the governments and the policy makers, but the other is at the people level. And you can have multiple peace agreements, but until people respect one another, there will be no real peace. And the kind of real respect is not a complicated formula. As Sammy expressed it, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And most all the religions have that kind of principle. And even non-religions. You don't have to be of a particular religion to have that kind of approach, that if I treat you right, then chances are you'll treat me right. At least it's much more than if I tried to hit you over the head or something, take your property or whatever. So I learned a good bit in the time there. And one of the ways I learned about the people there, and particularly in that event in Palestine, was I stayed with two Palestinian families. One was the Anwar and Mirvat Banura and their children Natalie and Sari, and Natalie is probably now 20 or so. She was just finishing high school and getting ready to go to Bethlehem University, and Sari was still in what we would call high school. One of the things that I would get up early every morning with Anwar, who did flooring, and we'd drink coffee very early. But one thing, and I had just learned to Skype, so I would Skype with my wife back home, but of course the time difference, she would just be getting up early in the morning and just didn't have her makeup on. She was always modest about appearing. But so I would be Skyping with her, and the whole family would come and get into Skype. So Mervad and Anwar and Sari and Natalie would be telling Jonelle hello, and what a great time we were having. And it's just a great experience to be in the home of someone when you go to another country. And not only did I get to know them, but other travelers were there as well. There were 2 young Mennonite women from Canada. There was a family from France. And you just sit around and you have great conversations, and you learn a lot about people, much more so than if you're staying in a hotel or someplace such as that. And then I stayed, and I was with them for about 2 weeks, a little more than 2 weeks, and then another family I stayed with was the George and Natalie Maria family, and George's mother, or father, Musa, and his mother Mary, and his sister Theresa, and their children, Musa, Maher, Michelin, and Maj. Benurs lived in Beit Sahur, and the Marias lived in Bethlehem. Beit Sahur is just, it's adjacent to Bethlehem. It's just east of Bethlehem. It's in the Christian story where the fields where the angels would have appeared to the shepherds, and you could look out the back door of the Benuras. That's where one of the traditional fields. Of course, there's the Orthodox field for angels appearing to shepherds, and then there's the Roman field. There's so many places in the Middle East. There are 2 or 3 different interpretations of particular events. And so when I stayed with the Benuras, the Marias in Bethlehem, every day I would walk past the church, the Nativity, on my way to the Holy Land Trust, and I got to know Bethlehem very well. I walked around almost probably every inch of Bethlehem, and it's a favorite place of mine. But one thing I learned from both families, and that is this wonderful practice of Middle Eastern hospitality, which you're just treated wonderfully well. You have great food. There's no way that you're not going to be treated well staying in a host family there. And that's one thing I learned. In May of 2012, during my time there, I also met a young person named, he's probably 30-ish or so, Ashraf Hatib, who works and still does in the negotiations unit of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. And he provided me briefings on settlements in East Jerusalem, and we drove through a settlement just east of Jerusalem, MAH00050. This year, back a few months ago in February, March, a few of us, Dan Bradshaw and I, took a group from Kentucky Wesleyan College to Israel and Palestine. And Ashraf, I developed this friendship with him, and he met with us at this time, and he took us actually to the Haram al-Sharif, or the Temple Mount, and we went inside the Dome of the Rock in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. the significance of that is that it's very, for the most part, non-Muslims cannot go in those places, and you have to get special permission. But he was very kind, and along with another representative of the PLO, took us to those two sacred spots for Muslims on the Temple Mount, on that most contested piece of real estate. Showing how small the world is. Also, on that same day, I was a bit under the weather with cold and coughing a lot and not feeling well. One of our Ashrafs, the other negotiator representative that was with us, saw how poorly I was feeling, and we were having lunch in East Jerusalem, and he said, well, I'll take you to my cousin's pharmacy just down the street a little bit. And so when I got there, I started talking to him, and he had gone to school in Kentucky, actually, at the College of Pharmacy at UK, and he said, well, I've also worked in various places in Kentucky. He started naming a few places, Eastern Kentucky, Louisville, Lexington. He said, and I was also in Western Kentucky, Owensboro. So,
Wow.
you know, again, this is a very small world. And, but on the trip back in 2012, I also met some other people. I went on a hike in southern Israel with, as part of the Abraham Path, which is a route that's being established throughout Israel and Jordan and eventually in Iraq and places to commemorate a traditional route that the figure Abraham might have traveled through the area. But one of the persons I met that day, who was one of the leaders of that group, was a young Israeli named Mishi Harman. Now, Mishi comes from a prominent Jerusalem family whose grandfather was, and grandmother actually, both were very instrumental in the establishment of the State of Israel back in 1948. And grandfather was Israel's ambassador to the United States from 1959 to 68 or so. Very important years in the establishment of Israel. But I became friends with him and stayed in touch, and then some of you may remember, I think certainly Dan would, that Mishi came and visited Owensboro back earlier this year in February and spoke to our World Affairs Council. And Mishi has started a radio program in Israel. He's actually a PhD student, but he started Israel's Story, which is modeled after This American Life, the NPR program. And so he, a very bright young person who, you know, it's nice to retain these contacts, because when we were there back in with the Wesleyan group, I actually got there a few days before they did, and I went to Mishi's parents. They invited me to dinner, where I also met a person named Benjamin Pogrund, who is a journalist from South Africa, but he's lived in Israel for the past 15 years. But he is was quite involved in the opposition to apartheid, and actually was put in jail a few times for being a part of newspapers who refused to reveal sources and generally opposed that kind of rigid separation system that existed in South Africa. He's written books on various South African leaders, including Nelson Mandela. But I remain in touch with Benjamin Pogrund because and have invited him to come to Kentucky, which he wants to do in the spring, in March or April. And one of the ways I've enticed him, I think, to come to Kentucky is to offer him some of the very best Kentucky bourbon. So if any of you are experts on Kentucky bourbon, then just help me. I know a little bit about it myself, but so if all works out, he will be here to speak in the spring. And one recent book he has is about examining the issue of does apartheid exist in Israel now. And I think his view is that it does not in Israel proper, but there are a whole lot of problems in the occupied territories. So he's very balanced in his views on the whole conflict. These are some of the people, and I could keep going on and on, but one of the persons I met at the same time I walked in the southern part of Israel through the Negev was Avner Goren, who is a very prominent Israeli archaeologist, and he a real expert on Israel, an expert on Abraham, expert on Judaism, and who was involved in the negotiations of back in the treaty between Israel and Egypt back in the 1970s. Of course, the question becomes, what do you learn from this kind of travel, or in what ways are you making a difference or contributing? Does it have value? And I think I've learned a few things, and I will try to somewhat summarize, and then I will answer any questions you might have. I think I've learned that we're all in this together. You know, we share a really small planet for a very short period of time, and we can get along. I've seen examples of that. Now, I've seen examples of Jews and Christians and Muslims who can cooperate now, and who have come to get past the enemy status, and people who have suffered greatly through the conflict. I mean, it's not just theoretical with some of them. They've lost family members, and yet they've gone past that stage of regarding others as enemies and hating. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're likely to have any breakthroughs on Israeli-Palestinian peace at any time. You know, early this year, at least that there was hope with the Kerry, or being very Secretary Kerry's efforts in that part of the world. But then when that broke down, since then this has been a very difficult year. Probably if we were looking at taking a group to Israel and Palestine now, I would think that maybe colleges would not want us to do that. So I don't suggest that we're on the verge of any kind of peace breakout, but I know that it can happen because I've seen the people get along. I've seen the separation also. So one of the frustrating parts about the whole issue of Israel and Palestine is that we pretty much know, and I was told this on my first trip 5 years ago, or almost 6 years now, that probably 80% or 90% of what the terms of an agreement would be, everybody knows that. It's a matter of will by political powers that exist in various entities that have a say of actually coming to that recognition and perhaps someone taking the first step, which there's always a risk, no doubt about it. But I think there's a much greater risk if peace is not reached and peace with justice for all sides, or as much as possible. One of my favorite places, and I'll end on this, is in the area as you walk down the Mount of Olives into the old city, to the Garden of Gethsemane and those places where Jesus would have, on his final trip to Jerusalem, would likely have traveled. And there's in the Gospel of Luke, there it has where Jesus wept over the city, and there's a church that commemorates that now, Dominus Flevit. But Jesus is reported to have said in the Gospel of Luke, well, something to the fact, I'm paraphrasing here, but if they only knew what makes for peace, and that's almost in question form, which I think may have been some of his most important words to us 2 millennia later. If they only knew what makes for peace. We have the ability to use our creativity, to use our determination, to use our knowledge to work out arrangements in which people can live together, respecting one another, and to live out some kind of rough, perhaps initially, peace, which is really the only way that humanity survives in the long term. All of these issues will be worked out one way or the other. I'm not so sure we resolve collectively some of the environmental issues. That's likely what will get us if we don't resolve them. But these issues of Israel, Palestine, these issues of throughout that are important through the larger, greater Middle East, relations with Iran, with ways in which we stabilize some of the areas where so much is going on now that's violent and crazy and all kinds of things. They will be worked out one way or the other, but my hope is that the best elements of humanity will come to accommodate one another. I'm hopeful that at least we can achieve some of that. And some people say, well, how do you remain optimistic? I'm hopeful. I'm not sure optimistic. I've dealt with people all my life. 30 years as a judge, I've met a few people that were not really nice. I've sent probably as many people to jail or prison as anyone. But I still believe, if we go back to what Samuel Watt told me and what he's told many people, let's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not a bad recipe. And that's at least a place that we can make a difference. And so I'll be going back in a couple of weeks to a new journey for me. I will be going actually with a small group to Iran, and that's a different challenge, but I hope to meet a lot of people that at least I can learn a lot and bring back what I learned and talk to groups such as here. And Dixie, I appreciate this opportunity to be here today. And this is a nice group, a growing group. And some of you I've known before. I look forward to hearing Sarah play. Are you providing the music?
No, I was just strumming it.
Oh, you were just, okay.
Yeah.
Miss Lee.
She's trying to teach me something.
Oh, okay, Dixie's going to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, okay. But I'll be happy to entertain any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
A few months ago, there was something happened that some considered a sign. It was like a flash of light over the Temple Mount, as I recall, and it sort of settled down like it was going down to the ground. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. I could, there's a lot going on up there this year. And since the collapse of the peace talks, and then there were the 3 Israelis that were abducted and killed down near Hebron in the West Bank, and then there was a Palestinian killed in East Jerusalem, and then the Gaza with the Israeli attack on Gaza with rockets going back and forth, and there's tremendous tension in the region, and particularly in Jerusalem, and a lot of it does revolve around events up there. So, but I'm not. So I can see all kinds of lights, I suppose, but is it something that's supposed to be physical, or some supernatural event?
Supernatural.
Okay. Well, I'm not really big into supernaturalism, but I just confess that. But I don't. I mean, I don't know.
Are you familiar with the 5 red moons that's going on now? I believe it's already been 2. They all occur on a Jewish holiday.
Well, I'm generally familiar with that, but again, I don't place a lot of stock in that, and I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but I don't think that's a way to determine what's going to happen in the Middle East. But I know some people do. I mean, there are those who write books about that and sell them, and some people believe that. But I'm not one of them. Yes.
Judge Butler, do you have a pretty good idea of what, having visited both with the Palestinians and the Israelis, do you get a pretty good idea of what the main obstacles to peace are in that region?
The easiest way to retain power, throughout history, is to have an enemy. And with the background of what in the 20th century, what happened to Jews in Europe, and then from the Israeli side, you see the security issue as very important. From the Palestinian side, you see, well, this was our land, and people came and took it away. It's such a small piece of geography and limited resources for these various groups to live together. Poses, if we had this kind of dispute in the United States, people could go here and go there and have enough land and enough resources to survive. But the instant, if you're getting back to maybe your precise question, is right now, I think the predominant ruling political parties in Israel do not have, they are able to maintain power more by creating, more by playing on the Trump card of the Palestinians are violent, that we can't survive with them.
Fear.
Fear, and that gets back to the fear part. The last Israeli leader who had the best chance of reaching peace with the Palestinians was Prime Minister Rabin, who was assassinated in 1995. That's not to suggest that others haven't tried, and I'm not saying it's all Israel's fault, because it's the fault of both sides to some extent. Israel has much more power than the Palestinians, so that they have more of an ability to fashion peace than Palestinians do. But but there will be risks that all have to take. But without a peace agreement, and some people, or what I say is that long term, Israel will not survive in a good way. I mean, it may be there for a long time, but it will not be the kind of state, modern state, that lives out the dream of its founders back in the 40s, and even prior to that. The people who were setting up a liberal Zionist state will not want to live there. They will move to the United States, they will go to Europe. Israel needs to survive in the region. It's a tough region, no doubt about it, but peace will work best for all concerned, Israelis and Palestinians, and Arabs generally, throughout the region.
When I listen to news stories about this, some of them focus on political factions. Others focus on religious conflicts. So, and I don't know if we will really give me an answer on this, but is this primarily a religious conflict or a political conflict, or is it truly both?
You know, that's an excellent question too. I mean, all these questions have been really good. I don't think it's primarily a religious conflict, but I don't think you can resolve it without considering the various aspects of religion. And one of the questions, and particularly I was studying that or thinking about it a lot the second time I went, back in 2010, can religion play a role in resolving the conflict? And there are some days I think, yes, it can. And then there are other days I think, well, you know, it's more of a problem than it helps. But the primary, I think that the chief cause of the conflict is that what's happened in the 20th century, well, what Zionism developed in the late 19th century when Jews started moving back to what was Palestine and the Ottoman Empire. And but it's the main obstacle is getting back to the question earlier. There's really not, I mean, there's a limited amount of land, there's limited resources, and how do you get these two different peoples, essentially what was originally Jews from Europe, with getting along and living with the indigenous people of that region, the Palestinians or the Arabs. And I don't think that's a religious issue, but religion is so much connected to everything, and it is, I mean, with some people it is religion. The people who place a lot of stock in the theories of the red moons or the blood moons, you know, and one part of Israel supporting the United States is the kind of Christian Zionism. Now their major motivation is religion, but I think your question I wrestle with all the time. I think religion does not. We use religion when we're really arguing about something else, whether it's in the Middle East or wherever. You know, we have a lot of disputes, and sometimes and if we can somehow say that God's on our side, then we enhance our position.
That's what I was wondering, if it's maybe it was historically a religious conflict that in more modern times has developed into a political agenda that continues to kind of co-opt religion to
Well, I think it does
further
co-opt
that
it, but,
agenda.
you know, historically, religion has been a part of the conflict, the Crusades, the Crimean War. You know, there have been a lot of fighting that, but again, religion's never totally part of it, but it's certainly, you can't resolve the dispute without religious considerations, but I don't think that primarily it's religious.
Yeah.
Well, in the aspect of religious versus political, how long do you think this conflict would have gone on had the United States not been supporting Israel all the time?
Well, you know, I think that the problem in the Arab world is that we're viewed in the United States as being decidedly on the favor of Israel and not being a balanced negotiator, and that view still
We
exists.
give them weapons, but we don't give them over here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's certainly in a prevailing view in the Arab world. But you know, one of the things, I mean, I've met people who, on a personal level, they liked me okay, even though they might not like what my government does. And so that's, you know, that's an interesting aspect of it too, that people could say, you know, could treat me hospitably, but at the same time, if you probably ask them what they thought about the politics of the U.S., they would not have thought that. And then not only with the Arabs in that part of the world, but Europeans and that I met that were visiting them.
You know what General Eisenhower said about that? All the people in the world would really like to be friends if the governments would just get out of the way and let them do it.
And there's a lot of truth in that. And the
I
older,
think so too.
the older I get, most of my life, half my life I've been a judge, so I couldn't really be involved in politics. But I'm really a Democrat. But I long for the days of President Eisenhower. I wish we had him back. He gets better.
As he ages.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think he was.
Well, Republicans have changed.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. But Randy.
I had the opportunity 12 years ago to go to Israel, and the thing that struck me was the everyday people you met on the street were friendly and welcoming, and you just said, you know, you were treated well. It seemed like the Palestinians were the friendliest. The secular Israeli citizens, I'm assuming the ones that I had contact with, were Jewish, but the most unfriendly ones were the religious Jews. The hotel we stayed in had 300 or 400 rooms, and since the Twin Towers fell 4 months before we went there, everybody canceled their trips to Israel. There were 6 of us, and we were the only 6 people in this hotel.
Yeah.
And it was the Palestinians, you know, run the hotels and the restaurants.
All the service workers.
Yeah. But it's just so aggravating to me that it seems like it's the religious people or the extremely religious people who are the ones who can't see that you know, this is one world and we all have to.
One of the challenges is how do we marginalize those extremists, whether they be Jewish or Islamic or Christian or whatever, and reach common ground, which there's more reasons that we have to live together than to be constantly fighting one another. Yes, Ben?
I don't know whether to start off with the bad news or not, but this morning on the morning news, the Islamists beheaded another one of our guys. And
was that in Syria or Iraq?
Syria.
ISIS,
Yeah.
the Islamic Caliphate. And tell me, I'm for them. I wish they would gather together Syria and Iraq and form them into a single de facto nation state, which we could then carpet bomb rather than pinpoint attack. But they killed an aid worker. They killed an aid worker who had been an Army Ranger, and he went back after his military service and tried to help the people, and they beheaded him.
Okay.
Bob Woodward of Watergate fame was on C-SPAN a couple of months ago. He said, we're going to be in this war the rest of our lives and the rest of our children's lives. And, you know, it's a tough thing to sell. Reminds me of a movie that came out in 1984 called The Ambassador. Robert Mitchum was the American ambassador to Israel. The late great Donald Pleasance was the Israeli foreign minister. And Rock Hudson, of all people, was Mitchum's chief of security at the American embassy. And he had the idea, we can't approach these Jews and Palestinians that are over 21. They've had so much hatred pounded into them that we're going to have to get the young ones. Donald Pleasance said, you're crazy, but he started a movement among the young people, and they had a meeting set up in an old Roman fortress in the desert of the young Palestinians and the young Jews. And of course, the Palestinian terrorists found out about it, and they surrounded it with AK-47s. And it was a good try, but it didn't work. But it's a good theory that there's no way we're going to be able to penetrate the brains of anyone over 18, maybe.
Well, I understand that thought. I don't agree with it, but I do recognize the problem, and I think that certainly focusing on young people is good, and there is separation. A lot of Palestinians I've met, you know, have only been allowed to go to the holy sites in Jerusalem on Christmas or Easter. There's a segregation between Israel proper and the West Bank that is greater than the kind of, much greater than the kind of segregation we had that most of us can remember of growing up in this country. And so one challenge is getting the people together to know one another. I see that's going on. There are many examples of young Palestinians and young Israelis in various types of camps and meetings, but it is a challenge, and it does become more difficult the older. When you become 30 and you haven't met other people, I mean, we get set in our ways the older we get. The younger people are much more pliable. But
There's always hope.
there's always hope.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So that's a good a place to, okay.
I just want to thank you for your presentation. I would love to have you come back after you've been to Iran.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I will do. Okay.
On that, you can go to the website, Cheaper Than Dirt. You can buy yourself a flak jacket with
Okay.
protection.
Okay. Maybe I'll do it.
Song. We get song. Time for the song.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Gary's gonna sing Hello?
Terry and I went to hear the Waylon Jennings sing a couple of weeks ago, and they sang this song, the very last song they sang. We really liked it, and we just thought we would try it. It's a Scottish, Irish traditional song that's usually sung when you're partying, so we thought this would be a good time to sing it.
Thank you, ladies.
Really beautiful.
Before Ann leads us in the extinguishing of the chalice, there will not be a 2 o'clock discussion group today. There is the tour of faith homes. Today is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on Highway 60, Mount St. Joe Mother House Chapel, we know where that is, Maple Mount, and Zion United Church of Christ at the corner of 7th and Allen, facing Allen.
Those are just open elections?
Randy might tell us.
1:30 till about 4, I believe.
Okay. Madison has to do an alternative service during Thanksgiving, and I was thinking about the Latter-day Saints, so I'm gonna go to her. Let's extinguish our chalice. Now we take our leave. Let us extinguish our chalice flame. Before we gather here again, may each of us bring happiness into another's life. May we each be surprised by the gifts that surround us. May each of us be enlivened by constant curiosity, and may we remain together in spirit till the hour we meet again. Together in spirit.